The silence shattered like breaking glass. A 6-year-old girl with hollow eyes and bruises covering her thin arms huddled behind rusted dumpsters at 3:22 in the morning, shivering in a torn pink nightgown, barely breathing in the bitter October cold that cut through Las Vegas like a blade wrapped in ice. Dead leaves skittered across the concrete in the wind. The girl's name was Emma, though Aria Morales did not know this yet. Aria didn't think. She moved. She was 28 years old, bone-thin from rationing meals, wearing the stained care home uniform that smelled of bleach and old people's skin. Her dark hair was pulled back so tightly it caused headaches by the end of her shift. Her eyes were brown but seemed to carry the weight of someone much older. When she knelt in the alley gravel beside the child, her joints cracked from 8 years of double shifts and sleeping on a mattress that had never been new. "It's okay," Aria whispered, her breath visible in the blade-sharp wind. "You're safe now." She wrapped the girl in her own jacket, the only warm thing she possessed that wasn't already claimed by survival. The child trembled like a small animal caught in a trap. Her skin was ice against Aria's chest. Aria didn't ask questions yet. She simply held her, rocking slightly, the way her own mother had held her once, decades ago, before pain and poverty had stolen gentleness from their house. She reached into her pocket. $34 remained. This was all the money she had left after sending $300 to her mother's chemotherapy treatments that morning. $300 that could have bought groceries for a month. $300 that bought for more weeks of fighting for her mother's life. $34. She counted it in the dark, feeling the bills between her fingers like they were scripture. Then she stood and walked the child 6 blocks to the corner diner, the one that stayed open through the night for people with nowhere else to go. The December shift was ending, the Christmas season hanging heavy in the air like a promise no one could keep. The server knew Aria. Everyone at Shady Pines elderly care home knew she was the only one who stayed late, who cleaned without complaining, who ate the cold leftovers from the dinner trays so she wouldn't have to spend money on food. The diner server didn't ask questions either. Aria ordered hot chocolate and a breakfast sandwich. The total came to $19. She paid with a 20, didn't take the change, and led Emma to a booth in the corner where the light was dimmer and the child might feel less visible. Emma ate slowly, like she was afraid the food might disappear. Like she was afraid someone might snatch it away. Her small hand shook as she lifted the sandwich to her mouth. She didn't speak. She simply existed beside Aria in the fluorescent glow of a diner at 3 in the morning, 2 invisible people sharing warmth and silence. "What's your name?" Aria finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer. Instead, she flinched at the sound of footsteps passing the diner window, her entire body going rigid as a statue carved from fear. "Police," the girl whispered. Not a question. A nightmare-given voice. "Please no cops." Aria nodded. She didn't ask why. She had learned long ago that the people who were most afraid of police were usually the people with the most legitimate reasons to fear them. Across the sprawling darkness of Las Vegas, in a penthouse that overlooked the glittering strip like a man surveying a kingdom that would never be enough, Giovanni Castellano stood before a wall of security monitors, his face carved from granite and rage. He was 41 years old but seemed older, his dark hair silvering at the temples, his jaw clenched so tightly his molars cracked audibly in the silence. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, white and thin as a blade, a souvenir from his brother's betrayal 15 years ago. That brother was long dead now. Death had been too quick, too merciful, but it was the only mercy Giovanni had ever extended. He wore an open white dress shirt, cashmere worth more than Aria Morales made in 6 months. His wrists were heavy with gold, a Rolex that cost more than a car, rings on 3 fingers that signaled ownership of everything surrounding him. 12 armed men stood in a semicircle around him, their suits black, their eyes trained on their boss with the intensity of dogs waiting for permission to attack. "She's been missing for 6 hours, his lieutenant Carlo said quietly. Carlo was thin, scarred, built like a knife. He had been Giovanni's enforcer since they were both young enough to believe that loyalty meant something. Last location ping came from security cameras near an old care facility. Shady Pines on the east side. Giovanni didn't respond. He simply stared at the monitors showing footage of the east side, the poor neighborhoods where people work themselves to death for minimum wage and still went hungry. His daughter Emma had been taken from his penthouse. From behind him. From a place where nothing was supposed to penetrate his defenses. His voice, when it came, was low and steady like the rumble before thunder. If she's hurt, burn it all. The building, the people inside, everyone in a 5-block radius. Burn it until there's nothing left but ash. The men didn't move, but something shifted in the room. A collective breath held. Carlo had worked for Giovanni long enough to know he meant it exactly as stated. Check the facility, Giovanni continued. Tell me every person who was working that shift. Every security guard, every orderly, every nurse. I want their names, their addresses, their social security numbers, and the names of everyone they've ever loved. If my daughter is not returned to me perfectly safe, I will spend years making sure every single person connected to that place understands what it means to take something that belongs to me. He turned away from the monitors and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The lights of Las Vegas stretched below him like scattered jewels. Millions of people lived in that sprawl, and every single one of them would burn if that's what it took to protect Emma. He thought of his brother. He thought of his wife, dead 7 years, taken by cancer while Giovanni had sat powerless in hospital waiting rooms, a man whose power meant nothing against cells gone wrong. He had learned long ago that being the most dangerous person in the room didn't protect you from loss. It just meant you had more capacity for vengeance when loss struck. 3 blocks away, in the break room of Shady Pines' elderly care home, Aria sat in a plastic chair with Emma curled against her chest like a wounded animal seeking shelter. The child had finally stopped shaking. She had finally fallen asleep, her small body going limp with exhaustion and whatever horrors had driven her into that alley behind the dumpsters. Aria didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her back aching where old scars mapped 8 years of hidden hell. Douglas Hale had been her boyfriend, then her warden. He had been kind at first, gentle, the kind of man who brought flowers and whispered promises. Then he had become something else. A blade. A storm. A prison with no walls, only fists and threats and the knowledge that calling the police would accomplish nothing because Douglas had connections with corrupt cops who owed him favors. The scars on her back came in clusters. Some were thin lines from when he had used his belt. Others were wider, darker, from when he had thrown her against the kitchen counter. One ran from her shoulder blade to her hip, thick and permanent, from the night he had cut her with a broken bottle and then told her she deserved it. She had made him do it, her body was the reason, her existence was the problem. She had escaped 2 years ago. 2 years of working double shifts, saving money in a coffee can buried in the back of her closet, memorizing bus schedules and planning every detail. 2 years of pretending to love him while her insides calcified into something harder than stone. Douglas had not fought her leaving. He had simply smiled and told her she wouldn't survive without him. That she was nobody. That no one would ever help her, ever believe her, ever save her. She was a maid, a care home worker, the kind of person people looked through instead of at. Emma shifted in her sleep, her small hand gripping Aria's uniform. Aria looked down at the girl's bruised arms, the marks that suggested rough handling, the hollow exhaustion in her sleeping face. Someone had hurt this child. Someone had taken her. And this girl had been afraid to call police, which meant she didn't trust the people who were supposed to protect her. Aria understood that fear. She lived inside it every day. The clock on the break room wall read for 17. In the main facility, the residents were sleeping, their breath shallow and measured, their time on Earth counting down like a meter running in the dark. Mrs. Chen in room 304. Mr. Rodriguez in 205. 17 people total, all of them waiting for death, all of them attended by Aria because no one else wanted to do the work. She had $34 in her pocket. She had a job that paid barely enough to eat. She had a mother in a state hospital 500 miles away undergoing chemotherapy. She had nobody, nothing, no one. But she had this child now, sleeping against her chest, trusting her with the kind of desperate faith that only appears when all other options have been exhausted. The November wind howled outside, battering the windows with the sound of something trying to break through. Aria held Emma closer and waited for dawn, not knowing that across the city, a man with a scar on his face and 13 armed men had just learned the location of the care facility where his daughter had been found. The industrial kitchen of Shady Pine's elderly care home smelled like lukewarm chicken broth and something underneath it, something like giving up. The fluorescent lights hummed their tired song above metal counters streaked with the remnants of 1,000 meals nobody would remember eating. Aria Morales stood at the sink at 6:47 in the morning, her hands submerged in water that had gone cold an hour ago, her fingers pruned and aching from 16 consecutive hours of work. Her second double shift this week. Her fifth this month. The calendar on the wall behind her showed November in bleeding red, days already crossed off like a countdown to something she could not name. Mrs. Chen, the shift supervisor, approached with an envelope. Not the official paycheck envelope. The cash envelope. $73 for 16 hours of labor, given under the table because Aria had no work visa, no legal status, nothing but a social security number someone sold her 4 years ago and a desperation that made her grateful for $73. Mrs. Chen pressed it into her hand without meeting her eyes. That was how things worked here. The money changed hands in the blind spot between one breath and the next. "Thank you," Aria whispered, though gratitude tasted like rust on her tongue. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the industrial refrigerator. Aria turned back to the sink, but her eyes drifted to the metal trays lined against the far counter. Cold mashed potatoes congealing in small piles. Green beans that had turned gray. Chicken breast, dry from the steam tables, the texture of cardboard soaked in water. Someone had paid $70 for this meal. Someone's family had stood at that window by the lobby and watched the nurses serve it. And then it came back to the kitchen, mostly untouched, mostly wasted. Aria filled a bowl with the mashed potatoes. Added the green beans. Found a plastic fork in the drawer where the staff kept their secrets. She sat on the concrete step outside the back door where the dumpsters lived, where nobody could see her eat from discarded trays, and she counted every dollar in her pocket while she chewed. 73. Plus the 43 from last Tuesday. Plus the 17 in quarters she'd saved from a resident's tipping jar. $133 to her name. Her mother needed $22,000 for the experimental therapy in Phoenix. 22,000. The number had started to feel less like a number and more like a sentence. A life sentence. A sentence that said, your mother will die because you cannot earn enough money in a lifetime to save her. Her phone vibrated in her jacket pocket. She ignored it. The vibration came again. And again. And again. Aria pulled out the phone, and her chest tightened. 17 missed calls. All from the same number. All from Douglas Hale. She opened the first text message, "I miss you, baby." The second, "Why aren't you answering?" The fourth, "You can't hide from me forever." The ninth, "I know where you work." 8 years had passed since she'd left him. 8 years since the night she'd packed a backpack in the dark and walked out while he slept, his fist still clenched from hitting her, his breathing still ragged from the rage that lived inside him like a second heartbeat. 8 years since she'd promised herself she would never go back, never look back, never acknowledge the existence of the man who had remapped her body with bruises and her mind with terror. But Douglas Hale had not forgotten her. And the longer time passed, the more he seemed to believe that forgetting was not his responsibility. Aria deleted the messages. She always deleted the messages. But the tremor in her hands lingered. The food in her stomach, already meager, suddenly felt impossible to digest. 3 weeks earlier, she had gone to Las Vegas Metro Police Department. She had walked into that building with bruises blooming across her ribs and arms, bruises that had appeared on her doorstep like a message delivered in fists. She had sat across from Officer Martinez in a room that smelled like stale coffee and broken promises. "He's been following me," she had told the officer, her voice barely a whisper. "He knows where I work. He knows my schedule. Officer Martinez had glanced at the bruises, then back at her face with an expression that suggested she'd heard variations of this story 1,000 times and found it tedious. "Do you have witnesses?" he'd asked. "No. I live alone." "And this man, Douglas Hale, you say he works in real estate?" "Yes. His cousin is Detective Raymond Hale. Works out of the North Precinct. Good man. Comes to the annual fundraiser." Martinez had set down his pen. "Look, without witnesses and without evidence of a clear threat, there's not much we can do. You might be misinterpreting his intentions. Maybe he just cares about you." She had left that room knowing the system would not protect her. The system was designed by people who looked like Douglas, for people like Douglas, and women like her were just problems that disappeared if you ignored them long enough. Aria pulled herself to her feet and walked back inside the kitchen. The clock on the wall read 7:01. In the main facility, the residents were beginning to wake. Mrs. Chen would ring the bell. The nursing staff would start their morning rounds. And Aria would put on her uniform, the one with permanent stains on the left cuff from a coffee spill 3 years ago, and she would move through those rooms like a ghost, a shadow, a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible. But that was Aria's world. A smaller, colder world, where $17 felt like wealth and safety was something other people got to have. Across the city, in a private restaurant where the lighting was deliberately dim and the booth was always reserved, Giovanni Castellano sat with his back to the wall. This was not paranoia. This was survival. This was what happened when you built an empire on the broken promises of men who would sell their own blood for money. The restaurant was called Palazzo, and it existed in a particular intersection of Las Vegas society where nobody asked questions and everybody understood that discretion was not a courtesy but a requirement. The tables were mahogany. The candles were real flame. The whiskey that sat in front of Giovanni had cost more than Aria Morales earned in a month. Carlo and Sal flanked him, sitting close enough to hear but far enough to give the impression of privacy. Both men wore black suits that fit their shoulders like they had been stitched directly onto their skin. Both men had scars, though they wore them in different places. Carlo's scar ran from his left temple to his jaw. Sal's scar was invisible, the kind that lived underneath the ribs where nobody could see it. Giovanni had been silent for 43 minutes. Not angry silence. Something deeper. Something like a man who had learned that the people closest to you could betray you in ways that changed the shape of your heart. His brother Vincent had done that. 6 months ago, Vincent had sold family secrets to the Moretti crime family. Information about supply lines, about money flow, about the architectural blueprint of Giovanni's entire operation. The ambush had come at dawn. 17 men had died. 2 more had disappeared, their bodies never recovered. And Emma, his daughter, 6 years old, with his late wife's eyes and a laugh that could lift him out of the darkest moments, Emma had been taken by the men who orchestrated the betrayal. Giovanni had chosen survival over mercy. He had chosen to make an example of his brother that would echo through every criminal organization in the Southwest. Vincent's body had never been found. This was intentional. 19 hours, Carlo said quietly. It was not a question. He was stating a fact. 19 hours since Emma disappeared from the private school pickup. 19 hours since the men Giovanni had positioned to protect her had failed. Giovanni's knuckles whitened around his whiskey glass. The glass itself was crystal, the kind that catches light. The kind that feels precious in your hand. But it felt light now, insubstantial, like holding something that was already slipping away. "Then find her before I burn this city down," he said. His voice was not loud. His voice was like the moment before thunder, when the air itself changes density. Sal's phone buzzed. He checked it, and something shifted in his face. "Boss. She's been found." The words created a space where no other sound could exist. Giovanni's hand moved to his jacket pocket, where he kept Emma's hair ribbon. It was pink, the color of her favorite dress, the color she had chosen when they went shopping together 2 weeks ago. She had put it in her hair herself, insisted on doing the bow even though it came out crooked. He had not corrected her. He had never corrected her. Where? He asked. Shady Pines. The elderly care facility on Boulder Highway. A worker called it in. The facility was not one of his. It was not on any of his own properties, managed by his people, protected by his infrastructure. It was random. It was the kind of place where his daughter would be in the hands of strangers, cared for by people who had no idea what her existence meant, no understanding of the weight she carried simply by being his child. Giovanni rose from the table. Both men stood with him, automatic as trained soldiers. Bring the car around. And Carlo, bring the quiet men. No weapons visible. We move like we belong there. Meanwhile, in a studio apartment on the south side of the city, Aria Morales sat on the edge of her mattress and watched the child sleeping on her couch. Emma's fingers were still gripping the fabric of Aria's uniform, even in sleep. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, the kind of breathing that suggested her body had not yet learned to trust safety. Aria had found her 2 hours ago, behind the dumpsters where the kitchen workers threw the meal trays. Emma had been curled into herself, her small body folded like origami, her eyes hollow in a way that no 6-year-old's eyes should ever be hollow. She had not asked to be held. She had not asked for anything. She had simply allowed Aria to lift her, to carry her inside, to wrap her in the only blanket Aria owned, a patchwork thing her mother had made years ago, before the cancer came. The television in the apartment was muted, but the closed caption streamed across the screen. Missing child alert. 6-year-old female. Last seen Thursday afternoon. Emergency missing person broadcast. If you see this child, contact Las Vegas Metro Police immediately. Do not approach. The girl in the photograph on the television was wearing a pink dress. Expensive dress. The kind of dress that suggested a life very different from the one Aria lived. The girl's hair was styled perfectly, her smile careful, her eyes bright with a kind of confidence that came from being loved completely. This was not the girl on Aria's couch. The girl on Aria's couch had bruises on her arms in the shape of handprints. She had a cut on her lip that had started to scab over. She had flinched 3 times when Aria touched her, as if expecting pain. Aria had made a choice in that moment behind the dumpsters, a choice that required no deliberation. She would protect this child until she knew she was safe. She would protect her regardless of who wanted her back, regardless of who claimed her, regardless of consequence. Because Aria Morales understood something fundamental about the world that most people never learned, nobody was going to protect you unless you were valuable. Unless you were someone's child, someone's wife, someone's investment. And if you were nobody, a maid, a care home worker, a woman too broken to matter, then protection was a luxury you did not deserve. But this girl was somebody's child. And for that reason alone, Aria would stand between her and whatever darkness had come looking for her in the night. Emma's fingers twitched in her sleep. Her lips moved, forming a word Aria could not hear. The wind outside the thin walls of the apartment rattled against the windows like something trying to break through. Aria pulled the patchwork blanket higher and settled into the chair beside the couch, where she could watch the girl sleep and make sure nothing else came for her in the dark. She had no idea that across the city, a man with a scar on his face and a pink hair ribbon in his jacket pocket was already moving. She had no idea that in exactly 4 minutes, a black SUV would pull into the parking lot outside her building. She had no idea that the choice she had made behind the dumpsters had just made her the single most important person in the world of the most dangerous man in Las Vegas. The black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of Shady Pines elderly care home at 7:33 in the morning, their tires grinding against asphalt like the warning of something inevitable. 3 vehicles, identical and menacing, their windows tinted so dark you could not see inside, arranged in a triangle that blocked every exit. Inside the break room on the 2nd floor, Aria Morales sat across from a 6-year-old girl named Emma, watching her eat scrambled eggs that had cost Aria her last $9. Aria had not slept. Her eyes burned, her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the hot chocolate to Emma's lips, careful of the bruises still darkening the child's small arms. Emma drank without speaking, her movements cautious, as if she expected pain from every kindness. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly white glow. Outside the break room window, the October morning was grey and bitter. The service entrance door slammed open on the ground floor. Footsteps. Heavy, coordinated, the kind of footsteps that came in groups. Aria's entire body went rigid. She pulled Emma closer, instinctively, her arm becoming a barrier. The footsteps climbed the stairs. Carlo Rossi appeared in the doorway at 7:39 a.m., built like a man who had spent his life breaking things, 41 years old with shoulders that seemed too broad for any standard door frame. His suit was charcoal grey, tailored, expensive, the kind of suit that made him look like he had just walked out of a courtroom rather than an interrogation. 6 armed men flanked him, their jackets concealing what Aria already knew they carried. Her breath caught in her throat. Carlo raised both hands slowly, palms forward, the gesture of a man approaching a frightened animal. His voice was surprisingly gentle, like venom wrapped in velvet. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. This is my boss's daughter. We've been searching all night." Emma screamed. Not in fear, but in recognition. She wrenched herself from Aria's grip and ran toward Carlo, her small body moving faster than it had since Aria found her behind the dumpsters. "Uncle Carlo, Uncle Carlo, Uncle Carlo." Aria stood so fast her chair toppled backward, clattering against the floor. She stepped between Carlo and the child before conscious thought could stop her, her voice shaking but firm. "Don't you touch her. Don't you come near her." Carlo stopped moving. Something flickered in his expression, a kind of shock. In 15 years of serving Giovanni Castelliano, he had seen violence and loyalty and ruthlessness in every combination, but he had never seen a woman with exhausted eyes and a threadbare uniform stand between him and anything. He said quietly, "I am not the threat here. Look at her face. Look at her." Aria glanced down. Emma was reaching for Carlo, tears streaming, her small hands grasping. The recognition was real. The relief was real. Aria's certainty cracked. Carlo showed her the photograph on his phone with slow, deliberate movements. Giovanni Castelliano holding baby Emma in a hospital 5 years ago, both of them in matching pink blankets, the resemblance between father and daughter undeniable. The image confirmed what Aria's instincts had already been screaming. Aria's knees buckled slightly. She touched the table for balance. Carlo spoke into his radio, his eyes never leaving Aria's face. "We found her, boss. She's safe. Unharmed. And you need to see this." There was silence on the radio. Then, "I'm 20 minutes out." The drive from Giovanni's warehouse to Shady Pines took exactly 15 minutes in light traffic. He arrived at 8:04 a.m. in a black Mercedes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, accompanied by Sal, his oldest lieutenant, and 4 additional soldiers whose job was simply to ensure that no one in the world forgot what happened when you threatened Giovanni Castelliano's daughter. Giovanni emerged from the car like a storm taking physical form. 6'3", dark hair silvering at the temples, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow from some violence in his past that nobody dared ask about. His suit cost more than Aria's annual salary, tailored to a precision that suggested a man who controlled everything, including the cut of cloth around his shoulders. His presence filled the parking lot like pressure before a hurricane. Emma screamed and ran toward him, her small body moving as fast as her legs could carry her. Giovanni dropped to his knees, crushing her against his chest, his hands shaking as he checked every inch of her for injury, his breathing ragged. For 17 seconds, the most feared man in the state of Nevada was simply a father who had thought he lost everything and had found her breathing. Then his eyes found Aria. He stood, Emma still in his arms, and moved toward her with the measured pace of a hunter. Carlo had already briefed him in fragments during the drive. Everything he needed to know. He stopped 3 feet away from Aria, studying her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being read page by page. "You found my daughter," he said. His voice was gravel and silk, the sound of something that could destroy with gentleness. Not a question. A statement of fact. Aria nodded, unable to look away from his eyes. They were dark, almost black, burning with something she could not name. Carlo tells me you spent your own money to feed her. Kept her warm. Protected her through the night. Giovanni waited, letting the weight of what she had done settle between them. You asked for no reward. No recognition. You just acted. Why? Aria's voice came out small, threadbare as her uniform. Because she's a child and she was scared and alone. And I know what that feels like. Something shifted in his expression, like a door opening in a stone wall. He noticed the exhaustion mapped across her face, the stains on her uniform, the way she was swaying on her feet from 32 consecutive hours without sleep. He turned to Sal without looking away from her. Get food from Marcello's. Everything. And coffee. Sir, we should move to a secure location, Sal said. Do it, Giovanni replied, his tone suggesting this was not a suggestion. 20 minutes later, Aria sat in the administrator's office with a table spread before her like a still life of abundance. Fresh pastries from an Italian bakery, espresso in a porcelain cup, sliced fruit, prosciutto, fresh mozzarella. Emma slept on the couch behind Giovanni, her small hand still clutching the pink ribbon he had given her. He sat across from Aria, watching her eat like he was committing every detail to memory. Who are you afraid of? He asked. Aria froze, a piece of pastry halfway to her lips. Giovanni continued, his voice patient, you didn't call police. You flinched when Carlo mentioned my name. You work doubles and eat leftovers from patient trays. Something is very wrong. Aria set the pastry down with trembling hands. The truth spilled out like water breaking through a dam. She told him about Douglas Hale, about 8 years of escape that had never actually freed her, about bruises that learned to hide under long sleeves, about a system that protected men like Douglas because he had cousins in uniforms. She told him about her mother in Phoenix, dying, needing $47,000 for experimental cancer treatment, about the impossible arithmetic of minimum wage versus medical debt. By the end, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm nobody, Mr. Castellano. Just someone trying to survive. Giovanni leaned forward, and the scar on his eyebrow caught the light. You're not nobody. And you're not alone anymore. The door exploded inward. Douglas Hale stood in the frame like he owned the building, like he owned everything. 34 years old, real estate suit, blonde hair gelled back, the kind of handsome that made cruelty look charming. His eyes locked on Aria like a predator finding wounded prey. There you are, baby, he said, his smile never wavering. I've been calling. Aria stood so fast her chair clattered backward. Get out, Douglas. He stepped fully into the office, his hand raising a crumpled piece of paper. A foreclosure notice. The MacGuffin object. We need to talk about that deposit I paid 8 years ago. The one for the apartment. With interest, you owe me $22,000. I've filed paperwork. You have 3 days to pay or I'm taking your mother's house in Phoenix. Aria's face drained white. That's not legal. That's not. I have lawyers and cops on speed dial, sweetheart, Douglas said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into the register he used when they were alone. I can do whatever I want. Now let's go somewhere private and discuss a payment plan. He reached for her arm. His hand never made contact with fabric. Giovanni stood, and the entire room temperature dropped. Carlo and Sal moved simultaneously, positioning themselves between Douglas and every exit. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of silence that comes before thunder. Remove your hand, Giovanni said. His voice was so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall. Recognition flooded Douglas's face. Fear followed. The name Giovanni Castellano meant something specific to anyone with connections to anything illegal in Las Vegas. It meant endings. It meant decisions were no longer yours to make. This is a private matter, Douglas stammered, backing toward the door. This isn't over, Aria, you have 3 days. He fled. Aria collapsed into the chair, her entire body shaking. He's going to take my mother's house. It's the only thing she has left. I don't have $22,000. I don't have any way to stop him. Giovanni crouched before her chair, eye level, his presence like gravity. Aria, look at me. She did. I will handle Douglas Hale, he said. Trust me. That afternoon, the administrator pulled Aria aside and told her she had the day off, with pay, that orders had come from above. She changed out of her uniform in the break room, moving like someone walking underwater. In the staff lounge, Cordelia Blackwood was waiting, perched on the edge of a chair like a bird of prey, her pearls catching the light. Cordelia was 58, wealthy by inheritance, cruel by nature, dripping in the kind of confidence that came from never facing consequences. She smiled as Aria entered, and the smile contained nothing but teeth. I heard you had quite the morning, entertaining dangerous men in the administrator's office, Cordelia said, her voice traveling through the break room like poison gas. 3 other staff members froze, listening. A lost child belonging to a crime boss, how convenient. And now you're under his protection. I helped a child, Aria said quietly. That's all. People might get the wrong idea about what services you're providing, Cordelia continued, louder now, louder than necessary, her words designed to carry to every corner of the room. I've already spoken to the board. Suggested they investigate whether you're using this facility for criminal connections. Several residents' families are quite concerned about safety. The other staff members shifted uncomfortably. Cordelia's influence was absolute. She had money, board connections, the kind of social leverage that destroyed women like Aria. Girls like you always think they can climb into better circumstances, Cordelia said, leaning close, her breath smelling of expensive coffee and malice. But you'll just fall harder when he gets tired of you. I'll make sure the landing is painful. She swept out of the break room, her pearls clicking like a countdown timer. But what no one in that break room knew was that Giovanni Castellano had already made 2 phone calls. One to his attorney. One to a federal contact with whom he had an arrangement that predated most of the staff's employment. Douglas Hale's background checks were already being conducted. His financial records were already being accessed. And Cordelia Blackwood, in poisoning Aria's reputation, had just volunteered to become the secondary target of a man who never forgot a slight against someone he had chosen to protect. The rain began at sunset, cold and insistent, drumming against the windows of Aria's apartment like something demanding to be let in. The rain came at midnight, and with it came the pounding. Aria Morales stood frozen in her kitchen, the sound of fists against her apartment door traveling through the thin walls like a warning bell. She checked her phone, 12:17 a.m. October cold seeped through the window frames. Her hands, already trembling from exhaustion, shook harder. She knew who it was. Douglas Hale's voice came through the door, slurred and vicious. Open it, Aria. We need to talk about my money. She didn't move. Her apartment was small enough that she could see the entire space from where she stood, the worn couch, the hot plate she used for cooking, the stack of medical bills on the table that never seemed to shrink no matter how many shifts she worked. On that table sat a folded piece of paper. A foreclosure notice. 48 hours old. I'm not opening the door, she called back, her voice barely steady. Then I'll break it down. His shoulder hit the door. The frame shuddered. $22,000, Aria. That's what you owe me. That's what you've always owed me. For being with you. For not pressing charges for all those times you were clumsy and fell. Each word was a blade. Each memory was a scar that had already mapped her skin in 8 different directions. The pounding stopped. She heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway, heard him cursing into his phone, heard him shouting about lawyers and eviction notices. Then silence. The worst kind, the kind that made her believe he might come back. She didn't sleep that night. By dawn, a legal notice had been slipped under her door. The handwriting was official, cold, impersonal. Douglas was filing for a civil judgment. He claimed she had borrowed $22,000 3 years ago, money for a car, money for rent, money for supporting him while he built his business. The loan was due immediately. If she couldn't pay within 72 hours, her wages would be garnished, her bank account frozen, her apartment seized. 72 hours. Aria sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the numbers on the notice. 22,000. She had counted her savings that morning, $127. She had $14 in her checking account from her shift yesterday, a double shift where a family of four had ordered $50 worth of food and left her nothing but a stack of coins that didn't add up to a tip. This was how it always worked with Douglas. He created the debt. She inherited the fear. He disappeared. She was left with the consequences. She called her mother at 6 a.m. The phone rang 4 times before her mother's voice came through, thick with sleep and medication. "Mija? What's wrong?" "Nothing, Mama. I just wanted to hear your voice." Aria couldn't tell her. Her mother had enough to worry about. The cancer treatment had already cost $57,000. The next phase would cost another $50,000, and insurance covered almost none of it. That money came from Aria's overtime, from skipped meals, from the $34 she kept in her pocket that she hadn't spent in 3 weeks because spending it meant her mother couldn't have her medication. "You sound scared," her mother said. "I'm just tired." After they hung up, Aria sat in the darkness of her apartment and did the math again. 22,000. She had $141 to her name. If she worked every single hour of overtime available, if she didn't eat, if she didn't pay rent, it would take her 4 months to save that amount. She didn't have 4 months. She had 3 days. The second day, HR called her into the office. Shady Pines elderly care home occupied a converted mansion in the better part of Las Vegas. The administrator's office was carpeted and cool, all professional distance and liability concerns. Aria sat across from the director, Margaret Chen, a woman who had always seemed kind until that moment. "We've received some complaints," Margaret said, not meeting her eyes. "About your conduct. About your relationships with outside individuals. About whether you're bringing criminal elements into our facility." Cordelia Blackwood had moved fast. "I helped a child," Aria said quietly. "The girl I found." "Yes, that's the issue. Finding a missing child should mean calling the police, not bringing her directly to our facility where she exposed our residents to potential danger. And bringing her father here, whoever he is. Her father sent people to thank me. That's all that happened." "That's not what I'm hearing." Margaret finally looked at her, and Aria saw pity mixed with something worse, professional detachment. "Several residents' families have expressed concern. Mrs. Blackwood in particular mentioned that she worries about our standards. She suggested we conduct a formal review of your employment history." Aria's stomach dropped. A formal review meant background checks, a deep dive into her personnel file, questions about Douglas that she'd never properly reported because she was afraid of what reporting him might cost her. It meant cameras, it meant scrutiny, it meant her past walking through this facility like a ghost. "I've done nothing wrong," Aria said. "No one is saying you have. But perception matters in care facilities. I need you to take a leave of absence while we investigate. With pay, of course." It wasn't with pay. It was suspension. It was the beginning of the end of her employment, and Margaret's expression said she already knew it. That evening, Aria sat on the fire escape of her apartment building, her thin jacket useless against the October wind. The desert at night was brutal, all the heat vanished, leaving behind a cold that cut through everything. Dead leaves skittered across the parking lot 3 stories below, pushed by a wind that felt personal, targeted, aimed at pushing her under. Her phone showed her bank balance, $127. Her mother's treatment deadline, 6 weeks. Douglas's legal papers, filed, official, impossible to fight. Cordelia's whisper campaign, spreading like poison through the care home, poisoning her reputation with each carefully calculated word. She'd lost 4 pounds in 3 days. Her hands shook from exhaustion and something worse, the creeping realization that she might not survive this. That no amount of double shifts and skipped meals and prayer could move this mountain. That the people who wanted to destroy her had resources she would never possess, and they would use those resources until she was nothing but a name in a court document. For the first time in 8 years, Aria wondered if running was even worth it anymore. If Douglas would ever stop hunting her, if she'd ever be more than prey, if the current might finally be strong enough to pull her under and it might actually be easier to stop fighting. The November wind, bitter, relentless, cut through her thin jacket like a blade wrapped in ice. Then her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Have you eaten today?" She stared at the message. Only one person had asked her that question consistently, only one person seemed to notice that she was disappearing one skipped meal at a time. She texted back, "I'm fine." The response came immediately, "You're lying. I can hear it in your words. You're still on the fire escape. I can see your building." Aria stood, her breath visible in white puffs in the cold. She looked down at the parking lot. Black SUV, engine running, a figure silhouetted in the driver's seat. Giovanni Castellano, watching, waiting, still protecting her in ways she hadn't asked for and wasn't sure she wanted. She went inside. She microwaved the last of the rice from 3 days ago. She told herself she would survive one more night. What happened at dawn changed everything. At 6:04 a.m., the sky still dark, 12 men in black FBI raid jackets moved through Douglas Hale's apartment building like ghosts. 12. Not Mafia soldiers in tailored suits. Federal agents with warrants, with legal authority, with the kind of power that couldn't be argued away or negotiated with. Giovanni hadn't lied to her. He had told her that death was too merciful, that what Douglas needed was systematic destruction, not an exit. 3 weeks ago, Giovanni had handed his attorney a file. "Find everything," he'd said. The attorney had found everything. Douglas Hale's real estate empire was built on sand. Forged documents. Embezzled escrow funds. Identity theft rings. Connections to corrupt police officers taking kickbacks. Loan fraud. Securities fraud. Wire fraud. Money moving through accounts in ways that made no legal sense because they made no legal sense. Giovanni had handed it all to FBI Special Agent Morrison, a federal contact with whom he had an arrangement that predated Douglas Hale's existence. A debt repaid. A sister found. A promise kept. The raid was surgical. Precise. Cold. Douglas woke to flashlights and shouted commands, agents flooding every room of his luxury apartment, their footsteps heavy on his imported marble floors. He was dragged from his bed in boxers and handcuffs, screaming about rights and lawyers, trembling like an animal in a trap as the world collapsed. Agent Morrison read the charges with the voice of someone who had waited a long time to say these words: wire fraud. Racketeering. Conspiracy to commit money laundering. Extortion. Assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. 18 counts. Carrying a 40-year federal minimum with no possibility of parole. "This is a mistake," Douglas begged, his face white, his composure shattered. "I have friends. I have connections. I know people." "Your connections are being arrested simultaneously," Morrison said, his smile ice. "Detective Harrison included. Your real estate partners. Your offshore account managers. Everyone. And every news channel in Nevada is about to broadcast your perp walk." By 7:06 a.m., it was done. Douglas Hale led out in handcuffs at dawn, his face plastered across every screen, not as a successful businessman, but as a predator. As a fraud. As a man whose empire was built on stolen money and stolen lives. The foreclosure notice was ruled illegal. The demand for $22,000 was thrown out as evidence of extortion. The money that had felt like a mountain to climb was erased in the time it took for paperwork to be filed. Aria learned about it from her phone. A news alert. A face she recognized. The name Douglas Hale and the words federal prison and 40 years and no parole. She didn't cry. She sat very still and breathed, and for the first time in 8 years, the sound of sirens didn't trigger her fight-or-flight response. Cordelia Blackwood's fall took 3 more days. Giovanni made one call to his accountant, look into Cordelia Blackwood's finances. The accountant called back within hours. Cordelia's dead husband's fortune wasn't earned, it was embezzled. Money meant for children's hospitals, for cancer research, for dying people who couldn't afford treatment, funneled into offshore accounts. Cordelia knew. Cordelia helped. Cordelia wore blood money like pearls. Giovanni handed the evidence to the FBI. On day 6 after Douglas's arrest, federal agents arrived at Shady Pines during Cordelia's volunteer shift. They cuffed her in front of the staff she had bullied, the resident she had patronized, the cameras recording her face as her careful world collapsed. She screamed about her reputation, her standing, her friends. No one answered her calls anymore. The charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, theft from charitable organizations, tax evasion spanning 15 years. Her accounts frozen. Her mansion seized. Her name dragged through every society page and news outlet as a woman who stole from dying children to buy pearls and cruelty. She would spend the next 15 years in a federal women's facility where her money and connections meant absolutely nothing. Aria watched the news report during her break at work. Her co-worker Maria whispered, "Guess karma is real." Aria said nothing. She knew this wasn't karma. This was Giovanni. This was a man who kept his promises in ways that went beyond mercy or cruelty. This was something else entirely. This was justice administered in the language powerful people understood. That evening, Giovanni appeared at the care home at shift change. He was alone, no Carlo, no Sal, no security detail. Just him, waiting in the parking lot as she clocked out, his black coat hanging from his broad shoulders like he was a general surveying a battlefield after claiming victory. "We need to talk," he said. "You did this," she said immediately. "You destroyed them both. I told you I would handle it. Death is too merciful. They'll suffer every single day for what they did. They'll have nothing but time and regret and cells that smell like other people's despair." Aria's eyes filled with tears, not sadness, something more complicated. Gratitude mixed with fear. Relief mixed with the weight of being indebted to a man who moved the world according to his will. "I didn't ask you to," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Giovanni said simply. For the first time in 8 years, Aria Morales slept through the night without fear, without nightmares, without checking the lock 17 times, and in the dark before dawn, she didn't know whether to hate Giovanni Castellano for making her dependent on his protection or love him for being the first person who ever truly saw her beneath the scars and the exhaustion and the weight of surviving alone. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. For months had passed since the morning federal agents flooded Douglas Hale's apartment with warrants. For months since every news channel broadcast his face as they dragged him out in handcuffs, his body trembling like a cornered animal. For months since Cordelia Blackwood's world collapsed when the care homes board discovered her fabricated stories, her manufactured rumors, her deliberate destruction of Aria's reputation. She'd resigned in disgrace, her wealthy widow status evaporating the moment her cruelty became public. The city had moved on to its next scandal. But Aria Morales had not moved on. She had built. The apartment on Carson Street had heat that worked without fail. The locks were new, solid, impossible to break with a shoulder and rage. She'd painted the walls a soft cream color, hung curtains that let in morning light, arranged used furniture she'd bought with money she earned rather than borrowed. Her mother's last chemotherapy session was scheduled for next Tuesday in Phoenix. The treatment had cost $22,000, the exact same number that once appeared on a foreclosure notice crumpled in Aria's trembling hands. Now it was simply a memory of survival, nothing more. She had accepted Giovanni's money. Not as charity, she'd insisted, her voice cutting like a blade through his offer of help. Not as charity. As a loan. "I'll pay you back every cent." Giovanni had watched her with something like respect burning in his dark eyes. "I don't want repayment," he'd said. Aria had stood, every muscle in her body coiled with the refusal that lived in her bones. "Then I don't want the money. We do this my way or not at all." He'd agreed because he understood something about her that no one else did, that pride wasn't vanity when you had nothing left but yourself. She'd been promoted at Shady Pines. Senior care coordinator now, her own office with a window, her own salary that didn't require double shifts and cold leftovers. The residents asked for her by name. Maria had laughed when she'd heard the news, that genuine laugh that comes from pure joy at a friend's victory. "Look at you now, Aria. Look at you." But Giovanni watched from a distance. Carlo reported weekly, his voice steady and professional when he spoke to his boss on the phone in the early mornings. "She's eating regular meals. She's sleeping through the night. She got her own apartment. She's rebuilding." Giovanni never interfered. He never pushed. He simply ensured through invisible means that she remained safe, that no shadow from her past could creep back into her present. The gestures appeared like small miracles. Groceries delivered to her door with no return address. The brake line on her car repaired without her ever knowing it had been damaged, the mechanic paid in cash and instructed to never mention who'd arranged it. An envelope containing $1,200 and a note written in careful handwriting, "For your mother. Not alone. A thank you for Emma." Aria knew they were from Giovanni. She never asked. He never confirmed. This silence between them was its own language, one they were both learning to speak. The invitation came on a Tuesday evening. Giovanni appeared at her door at 7 o'clock, not in the black SUV with Carlo and Sal, not surrounded by his machinery of power and protection. Just him, in a charcoal suit that cost more than her annual rent, his presence filling the small apartment like water filling a cup. "Come to dinner," he said. "Nowhere dangerous. My restaurant. The private booth." She said yes before her fear could argue. The restaurant was exactly what Aria expected and nothing like she'd imagined. Italian marble floors, soft lighting from fixtures that looked like they belonged in museums, waiters who moved with the precision of soldiers. Giovanni's regular table sat in the back, hidden from view by heavy velvet curtains the color of wine. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that made something crack open in her chest. She wore a simple dress, navy blue, not drowning in exhaustion anymore but not trying to be something she wasn't either. Her eyes were clearer. Her hands were steady. He'd ordered her favorite foods though she'd never told him what they were. "Handwriting on a prescription pad," he said when she asked. "Your doctor sent it to our clinic for verification after your mother's case. Salmon, lemon, light sauce. No red meat. You eat light." He'd paid attention. He'd written everything down. He'd remembered. They circled through conversation like dancers learning a new rhythm. Safe topics at first. Her job. Her mother's recovery. The weather. Then Giovanni did something she'd never seen him do. He talked about Vincent. "My brother," he said, and the words came out rough, like rocks being pulled from a riverbed. "We built everything together for 15 years. Then he decided the empire wasn't enough for him. He decided he wanted me destroyed so he could take everything I'd built. He made a deal with the Moretti family. It cost him his life. I made that decision because I chose survival. I chose power. And I lost a piece of my humanity the morning I gave the order." He paused, his dark eyes fixed on the candle between them. "I thought I'd lost all of it until the morning Carlo called and told me a woman with $34 and a broken body had spent the entire night protecting my daughter. You reminded me what humanity looks like, Aria." She listened. This was the Mafia boss speaking, yes, but beneath it was something else. A father terrified of losing his child again. A brother who carried the weight of his own choice. Someone as scarred as she was, just in different ways, marked by different violence. Aria reached across the table. Her fingers brushed his. "I'm not afraid of you, Giovanni. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. You should be. But I'm not. The moment stretched like honey poured through silence. Then Emma appeared from the kitchen, emerging from behind the swinging doors with flour dusted across her small shoulders, grinning like she'd just discovered something wonderful. She'd been cooking with the chef, Giovanni said simply. He'd wanted Aria to see his whole life, not just the dangerous parts. Not just the power and the black SUVs and the men in suits who'd once tried to take her from him. Emma hugged Aria without hesitation. Dad says you're coming to my birthday party. Aria looked at Giovanni, questioning. He shrugged like it was nothing, this casual offer of inclusion, this simple door opening into a life she'd never imagined. If you want to, he said. I want to, Aria whispered. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a dramatic kiss or a moment of surrendered passion. It was simpler than that and somehow harder. It was two broken people choosing to trust each other one careful step at a time, building something real from nothing but choice and presence and the daily decision to stay. 6 months later, standing in the office of her promotion ceremony, Aria Morales was no longer invisible. She'd paid back $12,000 of Giovanni's loan through her own salary and meticulous budgeting. He'd tried to refuse the payments. She'd mailed them anyway. Her mother was in remission. She had a position directing patient care for all of Shady Pines, a salary that let her breathe without counting every dollar, without knowing the exact cost of survival. One evening at the restaurant, Emma doing homework in the booth beside them, the rain drumming against the windows like a heartbeat, Giovanni took Aria's hand. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist where old scars still lived faintly beneath her skin, maps of a journey she'd survived alone. I need to tell you something, he said. That sounds ominous, she answered, but she was smiling. I'm falling in love with you. Have been since the morning Carlo called and said you spent your last $34 to protect a stranger's child. I'm not asking you to love me back or change your life or accept my world. I just need you to know. Aria's eyes filled with tears. Not sadness. Something heavier, something worth holding. Giovanni, I rebuilt my life with my own hands because you gave me the space and safety to do it. You didn't rescue me. You didn't buy me. You stood beside me while I rescued myself. That's why I'm falling in love with you too. You're sure? My world is dangerous. So is mine. We'll figure it out together. They didn't kiss. Not yet. This story was never about grand gestures. It was about two people who'd survived hell choosing to build something real in its aftermath. Emma looked up from her homework, pencil poised mid-calculation. Does this mean Aria is staying? Giovanni looked at Aria. She nodded without hesitation, her voice steady and certain. Yeah, kiddo. I'm staying. This is what salvation looks like when it arrives. Not as a hero on a white horse. Not as someone who swoops in and fixes everything with power or money or connections. Salvation looks like a dangerous man who respects your strength enough to let you save yourself. It looks like a woman who rebuilds her own life, brick by brick, choice by choice, refusing to be broken by the people who tried to destroy her. And it looks like two scarred people choosing each other when they could have walked away into safer worlds. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to believe that broken people can build beautiful things. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will wreck you in the best way. Drop a comment telling us, would you have spent your last $34 to save a child you'd never met? We read every single one. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. See you in the next story.